Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the University of Southampton, to the Faculty of Medicine in the heart of University Hospital, Southampton. My name is Lucy Green and I'm a scientist in the Faculty of Medicine. I welcome you, members of the public, some of whom are A-level students that came to visit our Institute of Developmental Sciences last month and did some hands-on experiments in the lab and got to meet and chat to scientists and find out a bit more about what we do. Welcome also to colleagues from the university and students and also colleagues from the hospital. The title of tonight's question time is Fake Food. And in one way and another, food rarely leaves our headlines. And boy, as humans, don't we half know how to push our luck when it comes to pretty much every aspect of food, from its production to how we consume it to how we throw it away. Food is with us for life, and from the moment of our conception as a bundle of cells and right through into old age. With me tonight is a glittering panel of experts ready to take your questions and to debate some of the really thorny issues surrounding food, its infrastructure sustainability and how it affects our health right across the life course. Professor Guy Poppy, who is the Chief Scientific Advisor to the Food Standards Agency and a Professor of Ecology looking at insect and plant interactions here at the University of Southampton. Also from Southampton is a registered nutritionist and an epidemiologist expert in tracking nutrition habits and patterns in populations of people right through into ageing, Professor Shaun Robinson. Dr. Giles Yeo, a scientist from the University of Cambridge, researching the genes behind our appetite for food and our state of obesity. He is an author with a book out soon and some flyers to distribute too. And a broadcaster on shows including Trust Me, I'm a Doctor and Horizon. A scientist from the University of Southampton researching and advocating with young people and policymakers about the role of nutrition from our very earliest moments of development and its effect on lifelong health is Professor Mark Hanson. Nathan Atkinson, a former primary head teacher on a quest, if I may say so, to promote health and well-being while protecting the planet. He founded Fuel for Schools, which uses food that would otherwise be thrown away to remove hunger as a barrier to a child's learning. And he's innovating in the classroom, trying to turn young people from being scientists to farmers to chefs and eventual consumers of food. And putting the science and policy into a language that all of us as patients can understand, and giving health solutions to boot, through her work as a GP and through her medical broadcasting work on shows including The One Show on BBC, is Dr. Sarah Jarvis. Welcome to you all. And you, our lovely audience, can, if you so feel like it, tweet about this event using the hashtag FakeFoodQT and let the world know you're here. And we will be taking comments from the audience. You can stick up your hand and take your chances, and I'll, if I don't see you, shout. But to get the proceedings started, I'd like to take our first question, if I may, from Jeff Joy of Thomas Hardy College. Jeff, where are you? Yeah, wait for the mic, hang on a sec. Yep. Do you want to stand up?
What do the panel think makes a fake food?
Oh, what do the panel think makes a food fake? Shaun Robinson, maybe I'll throw this open to you first.
Okay, my mic just works, does it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So what is a fake food? I think a fake food is a food that looks different from what you're expecting in terms of its composition. Its composition differs from what would be normally expected to a food that looks like that. So let me explain. If you go and you want orange juice, you go to the supermarket, you buy orange juice, you have an expectation that it was an orange first and then it was squeezed and then it went into a carton and then it came back to you. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe water was taken out, oxygen was taken out, maybe flavours were added, maybe sugar was added. And so the food you bought, you didn't look at the label, you were busy, actually isn't quite what it seems. And That comes with food processing particularly. It's not exclusively so, but it tends to be, we've become very sophisticated in our ability to process foods, so we can deconstruct foods and reconstruct them into something that looks rather similar. And as consumers, we don't really know what's in them. But just to finish, I just don't want to demonise processed foods, because I eat processed foods all the time and I've got a fridge with milk and yoghurt in it at this very moment. So it's not just about processing, but thinking hard about some of the ultra-processing, we call it. You know, there's so many modifications to the foods, being broken down into constituents, perhaps even down into nutrients like starch, and then back up again. We don't really know what the effects on health are.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. Sarah Jarvis, as somebody who sees the front, the cold face, if you like, of seeing patients walking through your door, do you agree with that as a definition?
I couldn't agree more. I think I was sitting here thinking, well, I've got nothing to add to that, really. So what I see, I think one of my biggest concerns is not just fake food, but fake food stories. Yeah. So, for instance, and I shall undoubtedly return to this theme because it's one that comes to me in my surgery and in the broadcasting world all the time, is, for instance, this demonisation of fat for 30 years, which did us absolutely no good at all, and we have learned nothing. Now we're demonising sugar instead. People don't eat ingredients, they eat foods. And yet the simple common sense messaging, there is a very good reason that the single most popular non-fiction genre of books in the UK is cookery books. And the second most popular genre? Diet books.
This is an anti-diet book.
And copies are available from all good booksellers. And I think that it really worries me. So effectively the mantra, eat less, move more, doesn't sell books. So of course we have to manufacture these stories. And I think that's very worrying for the population, because I see patients all the time who come in with absolutely no idea what they should be doing. And I think even more worryingly, they come in completely convinced that we don't know what we're talking about, because their viewers, the Daily Mail, told me last month that I should be doing this, and now it's telling me completely the opposite.
Thanks. Guy Poppy, is your role at the Food Standards Agency really gets you right up close to this sort of very issue. What do you deem to be fake food?
Well, I mean, again, I don't want to repeat what's gone before, but I think I can give you some illustrations in which the incident, which became known as Horsegate, resulted in the creation of the National Food Crime Unit in the UK, and that organisation looks at quite a lot of fake food. Wherever there's money to be made, you can get kind of fake products. And I suppose the question there is, some of these things are quite dangerous. If we take the illustration of when the price of high-value spices go up on the world market, you get a lot of groundnut mixed in to the spice, which has obviously issues in terms of people suffering from nut allergy. Fake alcohol, again, causes a whole range of issues. Fortunately, often the fraudsters can't spell Chardonnay, so it's quite easy to spot on the label that it is fake. But there are other issues which aren't so much a health issue, but they affect your bank balance. So, for instance, there's the New Zealand government approached us and said there seems to be more Manuka honey sold in UK supermarkets than the whole of New Zealand produces. So is it right that people are paying £40 or £50 for this honey? And one can list a number of other cases like that. And the final thing I would say is the issue of sometimes the perception. So is it right that when people buy milk or eggs and there's this image of a green field and not very high density kind of stocking, etc., that they think they're buying that, but perhaps it isn't how that thing's actually been produced. And
thank you. Giles Yeo.
I think I'm not going to add anything in terms of the sentiment of what a fake food might actually be, but I do have a problem with the term fake food. Only because the term, just in terms of, because if something is fake, then something else can be real and or clean or anything like that. So I think the sentiment I absolutely agree with. We need to know where our food comes from. I do think so. I think we don't want to demonize food. I also do believe that. But I think the term fake food does have a risk of demonizing the food, and more importantly, demonizing the person who happens to be eating something which may or may not be fake, because then by guilt by association, you could then become fake rather than real. So that would be my 2 pence to add to the fake food.
Nathan Atkinson, in your capacity as a former head teacher, you must have seen all manner of food being brought through the doors in the schools that you taught in. What would you define as fake or real food?
It's a tricky one. I think one thing that stands out in my mind is it's not necessarily fake food, and I agree that food is food, and it's the whole language that we use around it, and the importance of education around that. Vegan bacon, well, it's not. It's that for me starts to send alarm bells ringing, because it's not. It's a different sort of food that's been put together to represent that, but food is food. And so I think that the language that we use in the education about it, and thinking the importance of future-proofing and trying to make changes now around that language, around the regulations. If we look at the estimated population growth by 2050, 9 billion people, we need to increase food production by 70%. We can't rely on traditional methods of growing, so we're going to have to be innovative. So there is going to be food that appears to be fake or different in the very near future. So what we have to make use of this opportunity to get that language right, get the regulation right, and to make sure that people understand what they're consuming and the impacts that can have. So really taking this as an opportunity to educate people.
Mark Hanson.
Yeah, just thanks, Nathan. Just following that, I mean, it seems to me the food is fake because it's pretending to be nutritious, as Professor Robinson said, when maybe it's not. But I mean, to be honest, do most of us understand food labels and what the nutritional content of even real food, whatever that is, actually is? And actually, are we educated at school or at university what good nutrition and good diets are? And you're the future, you guys. I mean, do you know what a good diet is and what the right kind of combination of foods that you should be putting together to achieve it is? I certainly didn't when I was your age. I'm not sure I do now, to be honest. So there's a good deal of ignorance at every single level, which the fakery can hide behind. And it's only when we understand these things that we're going to make the demands for them to be provided, which of course the companies will come along and provide. If we don't buy fake food, no one's going to try and market it.
Perhaps we should hear Jeff, does that answer your question? And does it tally with your notions about the fakery of food?
Yeah, I think that it's probably a bigger problem in other countries because I think our food regulation is quite good. But yeah, that's really helpful.
Thank you.
It's an interesting comment, if I may, because I think you're absolutely right in respect of a lot of what we've talked about here. So certainly fake food, horsegate, you wouldn't get horsegate in other countries. But one of the things that really upsets me in terms of fake food, I suppose another way in which I see it, is food that pretends to be something it's not. And, our celebrity culture, when I get dumped on Good Morning Britain because they brought in Will I Am as an expert on ADHD, you kind of think something's gone a bit wrong in our society. Gwyneth Paltrow. God bless her or not. Goop has been responsible for so much, as my father would put it, codswallop. It is extraordinary, the number of patients I get. In fact, actually, on Monday in Radio 2, I went in, and the producer in Radio 2 said, would you like to try my amazing polenta cake? There's no added sugar at all. And I said, why, that's absolutely amazing. And I tried a bit, it was delicious. And it turned out there wasn't any added sugar. Instead, he'd added agave syrup, because that's fine, isn't it? And, Himalayan rock salt. It may be pink, and it may cost £1,800 a tonne. But you know what? It's made of sodium and chloride. It's salt.
Right. Thank you. I know that there's loads of questions lurking in the audience, and I think maybe we should move on to our second question, which is from Catherine Brooks of Brockenhurst College. Catherine, you're there. Can we get a microphone to you?
Yes, so my question is, do you think that the NHS should treat food-related diseases in people unwilling to make dietary changes?
Well, I think the obvious place to start is back with my colleague over here, Sarah Jarvis.
It's an absolutely fantastic question, and one I think that all of us struggle with, because unfortunately society is largely polarised, and certainly in the media I see examples, and of course they deliberately do it in the media in order to make the news more interesting, or the discussion more interesting. On the one hand, for instance, when we talk about obesity, and should we be treating people with obesity who have a heart attack? Well, the question, of course, really, or should we be treating people with obesity for obesity-related diseases? The simple fact of the matter is, if somebody has a heart attack, then it may or may not be related to the fact that they are morbidly obese. And if you take that to its logical conclusion, then what you would be saying is effectively somebody comes in to the, in a blue light with 999 to A&E, they are put on the scales and they are told that they can go and sit in the corner and expire from their heart attack because their body mass index is over 35. Clearly, we absolutely cannot do that. But at the other end of the spectrum, there are lots of situations coming in where we are saying we will not treat people, for instance, who haven't made any attempt to lose weight, because, not because we are judging them, but because the likelihood of success of that operation, hip replacements, for instance, is so much smaller if somebody is very overweight. So if they can lose some weight, there's a really good chance not only that the hip replacement is more likely to be successful, but also there's a really good chance that they will actually put that hip to good use and continue to exercise, continue to maintain their own health. So I think there's a world of difference between saying we're not treating you because you're overweight and saying we're not treating overweight people because it will result in the scarce resources of the NHS being less cost effectively used.
That's great points. Nathan Atkinson, what's your opinion on this matter? Should we be treating people with food-related diseases who are unwilling to make dietary changes?
Well, a slightly different take. Over the weekend, spent 8 hours in a hospital with my wife waiting for treatment, and became frustrated every time somebody who was ahead of us waiting to be seen went out for a cigarette. So I guess that maybe that's comparable in terms of food, although I wasn't judging the people that were going out for food, but I guess it's all relative. But considering the amount of money that we spend, I think that we spend more on the treatment of diabetes or obesity-related illnesses than we do on the police, fire service and judicial...
Only type 2 diabetes.
Type 2, damn it. You already got us once on that. On obesity-related illnesses than we do on the police, fire service and judicial system combined, on something that is preventable and preventable through education. But then when we look at how society and technology and our demand for instant gratification on things like social media, and using technology to sit in your armchair and order a pizza to be delivered, ironically by somebody on a bike who's having a great workout, to your door, that it's a very complex and complicated situation. And as a result, it's so multi-layered, because as a result of this availability of fast food, we have got a skills gap because people are not cooking as much, so skills that are passed down generationally are not being passed down. So we're in this vicious cycle whereby we're creating more and more problems. I've successfully not answered your question.
That's great. No, I'll throw this over to Giles Yeo. I mean, what is your feeling? You know, do you agree with these?
No. I think. Well, okay. No, that was a very big no. Let me qualify my no. I think it depends what you mean by choice. I think it is clearly when you're actually dealing with a diet-related. Okay, making correct food choices. Yeah, I pick a strawberry today rather than a broccoli, a chocolate cake rather than a pie. Okay, that is a choice. True. But how difficult is it to actually make that choice? And I think this is where it comes from, and this is where the nuance lies. And I studied the variation, the genetic variation about how different people react differently around food. Okay, while the environment has driven the problem that we have today, at the end of the day, because we behave differently around food, we react differently around food. I'll give you a very facetious example. Okay, so I'm not allowed to buy any chocolate in the house because my wife will actually eat all the chocolate. Okay, this is not a. I'm just saying this is what the case. Whereas me, I can take or leave chocolate. I got no issues. Not because I have willpower. I just don't happen to like chocolate. Pork scratchings. Okay, this is a problem for me, right? So what I'm saying is we need to understand the way people behave differently around food, and put simplistically, some people are going to be slightly hungrier all the time, okay, because of their genes, because of some environmental drivers, because of epigenetics, because of any number of different changes that are there. But if you're slightly more hungry all the time, it's always going to be more difficult to say no. So I agree that we need to be. You can't not treat someone with a heart attack. But you need to lose the weight to reduce the risk in order for him. That is those things I agree with. But I think we have to understand the word choice. And yes, it is a choice, but it's a weighted dice. Okay, so for some people, it's always going to be more difficult to say no.
Thank you. That was great.
I think that there's that choice as in individuals, but also your context and poverty.
Yes,
so
that's right.
Whilst poverty and obesity are just so closely linked, and when they absolutely shouldn't be. People think, oh, people are obese because they're getting too much of good things, but actually, if you live in a food desert and you can't access the fresh fruit and vegetables, you become reliant on the fast food, cheap fast food. That in itself is something else to look at. So where you're born, where you grow up,
that's not a
the
choice.
Context you live. So again, that's looking at it from another point of view as well.
Thanks, you know, it's a good point. I think
slightly controversial there, and just say that I work in Shepherd's Bush, where there are hundreds of fast food shops. We also have Shepherd's Bush Market, where you can get great bowls of fresh vegetables, and yet my patients choose the fast food shop. So I think it's to do with education as well as availability.
Shaun, as a nutritionist, what's your perspective on this, opinion on whether we should be treating people who are unwilling to make dietary choices?
So I don't actually ever have to make that decision, so it's a bit hypothetical, but I would say absolutely they have to be treated, because I get the point about hip replacement working better if they are slimmer. Of course, that's important, but people are, if you just take obesity, are overweight for a reason. They didn't used to be, we didn't have the prevalence of obesity that we have now, and that's about the wider context, which has sort of been referred to. And some people will do better individually than others, but unless we make the wider context supportive and enabling, so that actually healthier lifestyle choices just become the norm and sensible and easy to achieve, then of course people are going to be overweight and in poor nutritional state, and of course they're going to develop conditions. And the sad reality is that will need to be treated, those will need to be treated, and they'll be expensive. But this is about prevention, isn't it?
Thank you. Mark?
The word, like my colleagues, the word choice worries me a lot, because excuse me, our research here over many years has shown that actually aspects of appetite control, the extent to which the food you eat gets laid down as fat, even your propensity to exercise, are actually set on train to a substantial degree by your life as an early child, or actually your life in the womb before you were born. Those things, a mother's diet, a father's diet too actually, how her body weight, whether she smokes, all those things set the sort of trajectory of risk for things like obesity across the life course, and they alter the responses that individuals make. We've shown in Southampton children here that actually those who didn't grow quite as well as fetuses in the second part of pregnancy, when they eat an unhealthy diet, get fatter than those children who also eat an unhealthy diet but grew rather better in late pregnancy. So are we going to say to this patient, well, sorry, Mr. Smith or Mrs. Bloggs, we're not going to treat you because your mum probably had a lousy diet, or your father probably had a lousy diet. You obviously can't do that. So I think that we have to understand the risk is, there are some biological risk factors, which, as Giles says, are partly genetic but partly environmental. And we also need to think about society rather than asking the question, why is this person choosing to go to the burger shop rather than the broccoli? Don't we need to ask the question, how is it that society sets certain individuals and certain groups of individuals up in the same apparent environment to become obese and potentially ill, whereas others are okay? Too much of a focus on the individuals is leading us all into a blind alley, I think.
These are all great points, and I want to hear from Guy Poppy in just a moment. But after we do, please, I'd like to see what the audience's opinion on this is. Guy Poppy.
Yeah, so I spend a lot of my time working with policymakers and decision makers in government and elsewhere, and I think what we're hearing here illustrates the problems often in which one can look at things as scientists often do, looking for evidence and trying to be as objective as possible. But ultimately, somebody making a policy or making a decision has to make a judgment call, and that sometimes they don't have all the evidence, or sometimes the evidence is conflicting, and sometimes they actually think to themselves, well, even if I did introduce this policy, will it actually deliver anything? It's easy to deliver a policy. It's actually having the outcome of that policy which is important. And I can give you an example in terms of some of our own work in which we looked at people admitted to hospital because of a food-related problem. And not from a nutritional point of view, this is to do with other things. And we were quite surprised in which 2/3 of all admissions to hospitals now are due to food allergy and food intolerance. Only 1/3 of the people, it's from food poisoning. Once you're in hospital, you tend to stay longer if it's food poisoning rather than food intolerance or food allergy. But the question is, if you developed a policy to say that somebody being admitted to hospital because they've had a late night kebab or something like that shouldn't be treated, how do you differentiate between somebody in which it was a peanut or something in the kebab as against anything else? And so that's why actually I think it's very easy to sometimes say, why don't they introduce a policy to do this, or why don't they do that? And it's much more complex.
Yeah, so really good points. Catherine, do you agree? Do you have anything to add to that?
I would agree with all the points that have been made, but I agree. And I think that it's definitely something that's on the rise in terms of how do we go about treating dietary-related illnesses.
Definitely. Anyone else in the audience have an opinion about this that may differ from our panels? Oh, yes. Lady, hang on. Can we get a mic to...
I don't differ from you. I just wanted to add something. So I'm an A&E doctor here in Southampton, so and obviously we treat everybody as equally as we can. I think weight and obesity is more complicated than even you guys have said. People who've had some horrible experiences in their childhood, maybe sexual abuse and so on. Putting on weight can be a defensive mechanism. Antidepressants affect appetite. Lots of medications affect appetite. I would say anyone that I treat who is overweight is always very well aware of that. And I don't think fat shaming people is helpful. I think that society is not set up to encourage people to be more active. I was at a hotel on a conference last week, and it was really hard to find the stairs. And actually, I think there's lots of things that we can do to make it easier for people to be more active. And I think that is a big part of things. And yeah, I think, and someone in the department today talked about the food they eat. And I think they said prick and ping, but I think ping food is very easy to have, but quite addictive and actually not very good for you. So,
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
No points. Anyone else want to chip in? Oh, wow. We'll maybe take one other comment. I think you just got your hand up in time then.
Hello. I was just thinking about the food industry. Do you feel that the food industry is increasingly marketing its food basically to appeal to our appetite with little regard for nutritional content? And if that's so, what should government do to regulate or perhaps curb that?
I think, Guy, can you take this one?
Oh, thanks for that. Regulating the food industry. Well, I mean, I spend a lot of time talking to people in the food industry, and it's quite fascinating when we talk to them about the social science that we do with focus groups or customer surveys, and we kind of say what the public are telling us is this or this or this. And, I won't name a retailer, but ones which have very effective or used to have very effective loyalty cards, said, well, we do the biggest social science experiment ever, in which we kind of look what's going on, and that tells us what people want. And I say, no, that tells you whether your marketing is working effectively or not. It doesn't actually tell you whether it's what people want. Their response tends to be, we provide food that people want, and if they stop buying it, we would give them something else. However, and it hasn't come up so far, is I don't think this is just about the food industry, in which the farming sector also have, and this is right across the world, have got into a situation of high yields, high calories is what makes money, and therefore the kind of the farming sector produces, whether it be sugar or various other things, because it's pretty high value for what you're doing, and the food industry then take what is seen as a cheap ingredient and then add value to that. So my argument would be that the kind of farm to fork in terms of changing the whole farming system, coupled with the industry, the food retail, is what has to happen.
Right. We're going to hold that thought and ask for the next question from Hamim Khan. Hamim, where are you? And you're from Peter Symonds College.
Does the panel think that new food products should be regulated like medicine?
And I think, shall we throw this straight back at Guy Poppy to start us off?
Yeah, thank you. Well, they are. I mean, you know, let's be clear. I mean, the Food Standards Agency has what's called an advisory committee, which is the Advisory Committee on Novel Foods and Processes. So, obviously, very busy at the moment looking at gene editing and what that might mean, as well as nanotechnology, 3D printing of foods, and those types of things. And they will be conducting kind of risk assessments to ensure whether that food is safe to eat or not. The more complicated aspect is probably some of the claims, in which I think the kind of the medical sector is a little bit, although I have seen programs to the contrary, but is a little bit better regulated, in the sense of if you are claiming something, there's got to be some sort of evidence behind it. Although that starts getting fuzzy when it becomes in the vitamins and the multi kind of supplement type space. So it's interesting when medicine starts getting close to food, it starts getting confused again.
Can we throw this over to Giles Yeo then? Do you have anything to say on this matter?
Yeah. But maybe not. I mean, I think with new foods, depends what you mean by new food. Okay, I think something like gene editing, something like GMO, I do think that making sure that foods are safe are fine. So I do think you need to know that. But the question would be, what about current stuff that is actually being taken? Vitamins, supplements, you know. At the moment, if it is an old food, so like green tea, for example, okay? So green tea clearly is an old food. I'm Chinese, I drink green tea, you know. But if you actually then concentrate green tea into a pill and take it, it's still considered a food. But the problem, obviously, there's a big difference between drinking a glass of green tea and taking a pill of 20 cups of green tea immediately. But yet, because it's a food, it's not regulated at all. There is no safety dosing on that. So I think new foods need to be, but I just get the feeling that some of these supplements in which they have concentrated foods do need to be looked at, because after all, the dose, you know, the dose makes the poison. So that's, yeah.
Shaun Robinson.
So, of course, we need to know about food safety, and I'm aware of the work of the Committee on Novel Processes and Foods. I suppose my first reaction is, oh no. There are something like 45,000 foods on the supermarket shelves. I don't know if that's a wild estimate or close. So the reality is that, while we establish that processes and brand new foods are safe, can we ever envisage a day when we're going to have the scope to understand all the health consequences of eating those new foods? Will we ever have an evidence base that we can work with? So it's a bit of a hopeless answer, really, but it's just, gosh, if we thought we wanted to do that, and supplements as well, which I absolutely agree with, how would we do that?
How indeed. Mark Hanson.
I don't know. I know we're not supposed to swear in the hospital, but what about Brexit as a swear word? All sorts of things are going to change, aren't they? I have no idea what the where we'll be. But I suppose the other thing that worries me, coming back to Shepherd's Bush Market and so on, is that when we think about new food products, is we might say, well, the company that makes this little number, if it produces a slightly different version, then obviously, well, that was my lunch club, obviously we should know what's in it. But what about the guy who's selling the burger, who decides that, you know, he'll put some extra dollop of really rich mayonnaise in and, you know, perhaps reduce the price a bit and call it something else? Isn't that a new food? There's no regulation there. So especially in relation to the kind of corner shops that supply the sort of foods that you may well pick up on the way to school and I may well pick up on the way in here, they're completely unregulated, aren't they?
Nathan Atkinson.
Yeah, I think that rather than the issue being about fake food, it's potentially around fake news and our obsession with social media, celebrity, and going back to your point about green tea, I don't use Facebook, but my wife was going, you should stop drinking that green tea because it says on here that somebody just died from it, and just like, actually we need to unpick that a little bit more because it is about the concentration and about this and about this, but people are influenced heavily by what they see on social media. So if a new product or a new food or a new supplement comes out and somebody with 50 million followers with no credibility and no qualification is saying, hey, look at this, I took this and now look how thin I am. I've got daughters in their 20s now that did subscribe to some of these slimming pills that we didn't know that she'd done it, and she was feeling dizzy and faint, and so it transcribes that because so-and-so of Geordie Shore was taking these, that means that it's safe. And so we have to think about the information, and again it goes back to education and the importance of education.
Sure. So Jarvis.
I couldn't agree more. Interestingly, you said your wife was talking about green tea. Actually, outside before we started, I asked for a decaf coffee because I have migraines. So if you have migraines, if you have irritable bowel, if you have irritable bladder, if you're menopausal, then actually you may help yourself by reducing or removing caffeine from your diet. But that has been moved across because there are so many stories, and the more popular something becomes, the more people consume it or have an interest in it, inevitably, the more headline worthy it becomes. So the reason there is so much nonsense out there about statins is because so many people are on them. If nobody took them, there'd be no stories about them because there wouldn't be any news. Same thing about caffeine. I asked for a decaf, and the woman said, oh, well, it's much better for you, isn't it? And I went, no, it's not. It's really, really not. I get migraines. Everybody else, absolutely fine. In fact, if we're going to go to the other extreme, maybe it'll reduce your likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes, and maybe it'll reduce your likelihood of developing cognitive decline and dementia, and maybe it'll reduce your likelihood of developing Parkinson's because they're now using some of the chemicals in coffee as potential treatments for Parkinson's. And yet, what's the story? Well, because it's come out, there's a story that's come out saying, people who had caffeine were less likely to get pregnant. Yeah, that was people who had more than 8 cups a day. There's a J-shaped curve for most of these things. People who drink too much water can die of too much water. And yet, we don't go around saying that can be dangerous too.
Indeed. We're all so informed, but channeling it in the wrong directions. I mean, does that address your question about sort of new food products?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I really do strongly agree with the celebrity thing that you were saying. I feel as if there really should be a new rule that's like put forward to say that, if there is a new product that's been made, unless there's scientific evidence, it shouldn't really be dispatched or anything like that. And, there should be proof that this thing actually works. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Amazingly, we're almost halfway through our time. So I suggest we move on to the next question, if we may, which is from Remy Wood of Thomas Hardy School. Where are you? You're there now, because get your mic to you.
So my question is, how does the panel think that we can encourage young people to eat healthier or better food?
Wow, okay. Well, I'm going to have to give this one over to Nathan Atkinson first, if I may.
So one of the challenges we've set for our organisation is how do we become the exciting alternative to fast food? How do you become the exciting alternative to McDonald's when they've got multi-million-pound marketing budgets and have so many people hooked on junk food? And it's about exciting people, and it's about exciting that younger generation. So we just introduced a program of aeroponic growing into classrooms. So we take a seed and a special growing tower, and 8 weeks later we've got edible vegetables, salad, and we're working with children as young as 3 to build the towers in the first place. We're using them to grow beans in one nursery, so we're telling the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, so we're using literacy to hook the children in. So we've got to find ways of creating immersive opportunities where really bring children together, people together through food and good quality food. And our work gives people another reason to make good food choices. Our work, which we refer to as stealth health, we teach people around sustainable development goals, so eat to save the planet. And the children that we work with, the young people we work with, are showing us that they're more likely to make a change to their eating habits to save the planet than they are to their own health. If we went in and said, stop eating sugar, stop eating this, do more of this, people would disengage. But bringing people through a hook of the planet and the environmental impacts is proving to be really popular. So finding that hook and engagement and way of making things exciting and relative to what society is and has become is really important, and winning hearts and minds from a really young age. And if you can get that right with a child, then the ripple effect that can have, taking those ideas and thoughts and even food into the home environment, encouraging those conversations and making food exciting and fresh food produce exciting is proving to be really successful for us.
Yes, I've seen these growing towers that you said, they're very exciting. Mark Hanson, I suspect you might have something to add to this?
In some ways, very little. I mean, I think the kinds of things that Nathan is doing and the things he said there are just absolutely fantastic. The way we're approaching it at Southampton, as some of you who've been to Life Lab perhaps will know, is to bring young people into the hospital, to show them the research we do, to get them engaged in the science that underlies the kind of things I said earlier, that, you know, your diet, your lifestyle can affect the way your genes work. Can't affect the genes you've got from your mum and dad, but how they work can be affected day to day by your diet increasingly at young ages. So we get them excited and interested by the science, in the same way that Dave is saying, get them excited and interested in the environmental issues. The other thing, though, that puzzles me a bit about you folk is that why aren't you more angry about this? You get angry about all sorts of other things, and people of your age in the States are angry about the gun lobby or angry about the environment, plastic in the sea, whales dying and being found with 5 kilograms of plastic inside them and so on. Why don't you care about your health and about your diet and nutrition, not only for your future, but for the fact that this is going to pass on bad health and bad life chances to your children, to the next generation? So some studies in the States took that sort of approach and said, look, you guys should really realise you're being ripped off. The food industry is selling you all this junk. It's not doing you any good. And actually it's going to pass on poor health to the next generation. And they found, I think, that there was a much more of a sustained change in diet in those secondary school students than there was in just saying, well, look, you're all getting fat and you should be eating this and you shouldn't be eating that, which is just boring and nobody wants to know.
Thank you, Mark. Sarah Jarvis.
Well, of course, as a GP, I see the consequences all too often, and you're absolutely right. I think lecturing doesn't help, but I absolutely agree with everything that both Mark and Nathan have said. And from my perspective, as I've seen it personally with my children and my godchildren, where, you know, they will eat food that they would never have touched before because they've grown it. You know, we don't have a large garden, but you only need a pot. We had a little pot of tomatoes that we grew this year. And next thing we knew, they were coming up with, you know, it was oh, I want recipes, let's think of some recipes, what we can make with tomatoes. And I think that sort of thing, exposing them to it at a young age, and I absolutely agree that young people, if you then, and I hear everything you're saying about sustainability and the environment, but what I've seen is that helping them to understand perhaps what their parents are doing to their own healths because they desperately want their parents to be healthy. I think that has often been a way that I've managed to engage young people.
Shaun Robinson, do you have anything to add to that, into the mix?
Yes, I think our history in nutrition sort of policy almost has been to talk at people and to tell them, starting in about 1983, this is what you need to do. And then if you develop something like heart disease, well, okay, you obviously didn't do it. And so we need to really change our mindset and change how we think about it, and also make it relevant to somebody who's aged 12 or 13 or 14, just the sort of things Nathan's been talking about, that actually it seems real and important and worth investing in, because to produce your own food on the table, not just to grow it, it just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of thought, a little bit of input, and you need to want to do that. And why would you want to do that when heart disease seems decades away? So it's about being relevant in the here and now, and the school projects just sound absolutely fantastic.
Giles Yeo?
I don't know if I have anything intelligent to add to this, other than you've got to make the option there. I think for there to be a choice, it's got to be at a price point that makes sense, because if it's going to be more expensive, that's always going to be a tough sell, however old or young you are. And I think just adding to the point of not fearing food, and I think knowing about food and knowing that sometimes you can have this, and if too much is not good for you, but this is better for you, you don't fear it. You're just saying that I can have a little bit of this, I can have more of this. And I think that will also be helpful. Don't fear the food, understand the food, so that you can learn to love the right amounts of it.
Before I ask the students in the audience, or the young people in the audience, why don't you care, to quote Mark Hanson, let's hear from Guy Poppy.
Well, I think the work that we've been doing would suggest that young people do care, actually. And I was at a debate last week to do with what are universities for, which is a very good question. And it was talking about the fact that universities have somewhat isolated themselves from the rest of society, and that's having quite big consequences. And so there's a lot more work going on in terms of what do students want. And the difference between what kind of attracts and I must get this right, it just shows my age here, I can't remember if it's the Generation Z or Generation X as against millennials, is quite dramatic. So whereas the millennials don't do a lot of volunteering and they don't do a lot of sustainable shopping, etc., the generation underneath them are very attracted to that type of thing. So I think that's a hope. So I'm optimistic that we can utilise that and move forward on it. And then we have to capture the ways of communication as well. So the Food Standards Agency has done a lot of work with Twitter. Now, some people might say, what on earth are you fiddling with Twitter on? Well, we ran a big campaign trying to tell people not to wash things like chicken because it causes problems. And actually we found that the young people hearing this message told their grandparents to stop doing something in a way which we could never reach them. Otherwise. And also, again, it just shows my age here, I didn't realise that when you are sick on things, that you put bath on the internet with a hashtag. And we've been monitoring that, and we're picking up norovirus outbreaks 3 weeks before the public health laboratories, because you just monitor Twitter to see when people are putting that. So you can utilise these things quite dramatically.
Interesting. So, throwing this back out to the audience, do you have anything? Does this make sense to you? I mean, do you care? What would make you care? How would you be encouraged to make healthier choices? Yeah. No, you've got it. Use it. Yeah.
I suppose there's that element where I myself, I've been told a lot of times, don't eat this, eat that, don't eat that, etc., etc., and it's always the same concept, it's always the same message, it's always the same way of saying it. And if I had 5 pence for every time I've been told it, I'd be rich by my standards. So there's sort of that element that if a new message, even to our generation, maybe not your target of much younger children with the growing cows, even if I saw that, I'd be pretty encouraged myself. And I think just a new message or a new way of carrying the message is essential, even just for our age, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. Any other?
Follow that? Just with an example. So how we use the Sustainable Development Goals to be able to teach that and to hook people in. So if you look at water, which is Goal 6, and if you look at the scarcity of water in the future, or potential scarcity of water in the future, but then what we do after we've told children about that element is that, do you know that it takes 17,000 litres of water to produce a kilogram of chocolate, but only 200 litres to produce a kilogram of tomatoes? So by eating fresh, you're going to have a positive impact on water footprints, and so that really hooks people in. So hopefully that's relevant, and we can differentiate what we're doing to audiences from 3 right the way through to 19 and beyond. So it's just finding that way, that hook.
Who had the mic? Are we doing? How can we encourage young people? Do you think?
First thing I want to say, until you leave home and leave your parents, you don't have much of a choice. So it's all very well going to schools and teaching them how to cook and how to grow their own food, but if they're still living at home with their parents and that cycle hasn't been broken with their parents, you can't make a difference.
Okay.
So actually, using food as a medium to engage with families is really proven popular for us. So the original sort of motivation behind this was removing hunger as a barrier to learning. So we put a market stall at our school gates, and when parents dropped their children off, they were able to collect food from that point. And what that did was open up channels of communication between home and school, previously with parents that would have just dropped their children off and gone. Families started to share concerns, they shared worries with us, and through food and through this medium of food, we were able to bring families in, we were able to teach English lessons to families, we were able to provide advice around housing, debt relief. So actually using food to bring people in and put the school at the centre of that community actually has a really positive impact on dealing with families, and using school social media, group text messaging services linked to YouTube channels provides a great opportunity to engage, because people do look to schools as a place where they can get information from. So it's not a magic wand, it's not the ultimate solution, but using food as that medium to engage with families and communities is really a positive thing to do as well.
So I saw some other, just to give some people some more airtime, another hand here. Yep.
So I would completely agree with the lady behind me. I'm a parent, and my son is lucky, I believe, because he's growing up being educated around sustainable ways to eat, healthy ways to eat. And I think exactly what you said there, how do we make it a holistic approach between the parent, the school, the young adult, because I've got no control over what he eats the minute he leaves my care, and we're quite lucky at the school that he's at, but there's a lot of work still to be done. So it's how do we combat, how do we get that everybody on the same page?
Yeah, Sarah Jarvis.
Comment there. I agree entirely if the parents are not prepared to engage, but interestingly in Shepherd's Bush what we see remarkably often is that parents want to but they don't know how to. So if you've taught young people that actually that vegetables don't need to be expensive and that the plate does not need to include quinoa, then they are much more likely to go home and say, hey mum, did you know that? You know what we did at school today? We took a bowl of vegetables and we turned it into, all you do is chuck it in a pan, and 15 minutes later it's this really amazing tasty stew, and can we try that? Or you teach them, I mean personally, what happened to domestic science? That's what I want to know, because when my daughter started at secondary school, in a very privileged environment, I think, the first thing they made in the first lesson, because she took food tech, because domestic science was demeaning, was how to make a smoothie. And the second lesson was how to make a fruit salad. And I said, you've got to be joking. There are kids, brought up in privileged, educated families where they don't know how to make a fruit salad. Yeah, apparently. And I think that's really worrying. But at the other end of the spectrum, as I say, if you can teach them that frozen vegetables and tinned vegetables and stuff that's really cheap actually is just as nutritious, and you can get them on board, then one of the biggest influences we saw in this project we did in Shepherd's Bush was talking to young people. I think you're absolutely right, they don't care about their health, but they do care about their parents.
Well, I'm sorry, because we got lemon drizzle cake the first week back, so I'm not sure whether we do better or worse than you really there. I think we should move on to the next question, and we have a question from Sophia Meroz, from Barton Peveril College. Sophia, are you? Where are you?
Hi, I was just wondering, do you think that meat eaters are just destroying the earth?
Are meat eaters destroying the earth? Are meat eaters destroying the earth? Giles Yeo.
Oh my God, okay. It wasn't expected to be called first. I think that's a complex question. I do think that it is a complex question. I think undoubtedly, and I'm not an expert at this, so I'm answering here based on some experience which I had being vegan for a month, and so I actually went and did some research on this. I think there are certain ruminants which cannot be farmed densely, and so require lots of space. And I think if we eat the amount of meat that we're currently eating with those particular sets of ruminants, then I just get the feeling that it probably would ruin the earth. Does it mean that eating any meat at any point, at any time, is going to ruin the earth? Probably not. I think the amount of meat we're eating probably is not doing the environment a great deal of good. But I just got to believe that we can harness our collective intellect to actually come up with a better way of doing things. So yes, I think we are eating too much meat, and that's doing harmful to the earth and probably our health as well. But I bet you there's a way we can do it without being extreme and actually removing meat entirely. But I'm not an expert.
Thank you. Guy Poppy, are you in a position to put any numbers on this? I mean, how big a problem is this?
Yeah, well, I mean, you may see that I've spent the last 4 years with politicians in terms of how I answer this question. But I mean, it's a big question at the moment, and you will see lots of headline news about it. I think it's one of those things, actually, you can look through a lens to find an answer that you want. So, for instance, let's give you some facts and figures. When you look at a thing which is called the feed conversion rate, which is an element of how much goes in terms of converting to something that you eat, then chickens and the kind of the intensive broiler chicken facilities, which is the chickens that you would be buying, it's about 1.4 kilograms now. So it's about 1.4 kilograms of soya or wheat generates 1 kilogram of meat. If you compare that with beef, it's about 10 or 12. So obviously beef is a lot less efficient at that conversion than you see with chickens. But on the other hand, that's achieved in chickens, turning high-quality arable seeds into the meat, and some beef will go on land that isn't suitable for high-level wheat and arable production. And that's why the question becomes quite nuanced, because what you could probably say is actually in that kind of low-quality land, which isn't particularly good at generating high-productive plant-based material, you know, having some of the ruminants eating there would offer meat, and you couldn't kind of just replace it with kind of a high-value sort of plant-based situation. But to do that would require a dramatic reduction in the meat consumption, which is continuing to go up, and we're seeing also not just going up within the UK, but actually the levels of meat and dairy consumed by the developing economies is going up dramatically too. So the answer to the question is that I don't think it's black and white, as some people like to put it, but what is very clear is if we continue the increasing trend to eat more and more meat and dairy, we will either see environmental problems, we will see health problems, and actually it will have to be a lot more economically expensive than it is currently too, because if you look at the full economic costing of something like chickens, if you cost in all the add-on costs, the real cost is about 3 times what you pay for it.
So it's a conversation. Yeah, Shaun.
Guy, can I just push you on the keep being political then? You haven't mentioned the methane production, which is produced from ruminants, which is obviously said to be far more important than CO2 in terms of global warming, or indeed the fact that many of these intensively reared animals probably not chickens, but beef, are given antibiotics in order to help it and so on. And of course, that's a major source of the antibiotic resistance, which we're now seeing in many aspects. So it gets worse than just the fake food that meat might produce.
Yeah, I mean, to answer that, I think the fact is that the very high levels of methane and in fact, in Europe, the use of antibiotics as a growth promoter was banned many years ago, so that isn't the case here. But I suppose the issue is that if you started having less meat in your diet and meat being grown in places which can't do other things, you are talking about probably a method and a style of agriculture which wouldn't generate the levels of methane that people are worrying about, and certainly wouldn't need the levels of inputs of antibiotics, etc. So that's why I don't think it's a black or white question.
Yeah. So not black and white. Nathan Atkinson, do you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that if you listen to farmers who are producing this meat, they would say definitely not. If you're looking at an avid vegan, they would say definitely is. So I was listening to a podcast on the way here, and I think the estimation was if you swapped one meal a day, then that can have the equivalent sort of energy saving from driving from LA to New York. So I think that there are things that we can do to sort of offset what we do, and I think everything's about having a sensible approach and a considered approach, and just doing everything in proportion rather than just going, like you said, full on one way or full on the other.
Shaun Robinson.
Well, I suppose my take on this would be about the health outcomes associated with particularly red meat and processed meat, particularly processed meat. And so all of this could fit together, because I don't have your understanding of the exact costs to us in terms of climate and so on. But we don't need to eat as much meat as we do, and there have been perfectly good modelling exercises which show that actually we can really cut that quite significantly without it becoming a problem in terms of iron and zinc nutrition. So actually we could all go in the same direction here, and these would fit together quite well. Yeah.
Yeah, please, come in. Slightly there with Shaun. Just because I think the problem we've got is that these are averages, and I think what we're talking about is very black and white stuff here. So, for instance, it's very interesting that you said the health issues related to red meat and processed meat, and then you said, and processed meat in particular. Actually, COT has got a very different view in terms of the carcinogenicity, the likelihood of causing cancer, of processed meat from red meat and lean red meat, purely talking about the health, and I absolutely agree with everything everyone else has said about the environmental impact. But in terms of, it worries me that these messages get out there. So in fact, it has said, it's extrapolated from data it already had, and said that red meat should be classed with, or COT is in the UK, is classed and lumped together with processed meat. Now, I'm much more worried about people eating processed meat, which has been processed with nitrites, which has been smoked, which has been preserved with salt, all of which are proven either to be very bad for your blood pressure or to be definitely carcinogenic, or both. Whereas lean red meat, again, you say, as a nation, absolutely, we could cut the amount of red meat that we eat, and there wouldn't be too many problems with iron deficiency. And yet, the problem is, when you have campaigns about reducing the amount of red meat you eat, the sort of people who reduce their red meat are actually young girls who A, eat the least amount in the beginning, and B, are most likely to become iron deficient. So I think the problem is, on an average, you're absolutely right. On an individual level, it's much, much more nuanced.
Okay. How does this chime with the audience and their feelings about this question? I can see a hand there. Yep. Do you want to grab a mic?
Thank you. I know I've already spoken, but I am vegan. I have been for 3 years, so I just wanted to add, in addition to this, we're saying about, cutting our meat for, health benefit, but also if we continue, I think, as you already mentioned, to grow animal agriculture and the rate at which it's going at the moment, we're not going to have enough to, if everybody ate meat and everybody ate this standard amount, we wouldn't have enough space to grow it, to grow it all for agriculture to be promoted. And I think that if we looked more at other ways, which I know is very prevalent in the media, we would be coming to a conclusion. But as you said, I think it is important to bear in mind that we need to be aiming this message at the right people and not at people who are then going to be at risk or perhaps, you know, don't know how to take this information appropriately. So, yeah, I think it's something that is very important, and I'm glad it came up as well.
Thank you. Any other voices in the audience? I see somebody at the back there in the green jumper.
I'm also a vegan, not for the health reasons, but the health is something that really interests me because I'm really worried about my health being a vegan, because when I try and find information about what I should be doing for my health, it feels there's so many people who can want to get money out of me. So when I see, for example, what vitamins I might need to take, it's obvious I need some B12 and things like that, but then whether I need other things, it's really hard to know whether I actually do or someone just wants to make money out of me.
Yeah, Mark, do you want to come back on this? Sorry, Sarah.
No, not on that, no.
Ah, okay. Do you want to respond to that?
A really, really good question, particularly with veganism. And one of my big concerns about generalising this and saying we should all be vegetarian is that actually most of the young people I know who are vegetarian or vegan are really healthy and they're very conscious about eating healthily. But if we took, a lot of people have a bad diet anyway, but if we took meat away from them and you know, ask them all to be vegan, in fact what they'd do is they'd eat nothing but pastry or dry pasta or whatever. So I think we do need to be aware. And you're absolutely right, there's not enough information out there. And B12 is a real problem. Marmite is this kind of, you know, if you don't like Marmite, you're in big trouble if you're a vegan. Because it's very difficult to get vegan rather than vegetarian sources.
Yeah. I think you would make a brief comment.
So we shouldn't be eating meat, but perhaps we should be eating fish. And I think the recommendations are that we should be eating 2 portions of fish a week, of which 1 should be oily fish. How much? Put your hands up if you consume 2 portions of fish a week. That's pretty good, isn't it? Now keep them up if it's one of those portions is oily. Well, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? I suspect it's because we're in
Southampton.
This is Southampton. Mind you, Giles, if you go down to the docks, I'm not sure you want to.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because apparently the calculations are that if everybody in the world ate the recommendations, there ain't enough fish.
Yes, well, I've seen. So eat more fish if it's available, or turn to your local supermarket who are now selling crickets in packets, I gather now. So maybe that's another useful source of protein, perhaps. I think maybe we'll move on to the next question. And we have a question from Josh Culverson of Peter Symonds College. Hi, Josh.
Do you think there is too much of a focus on body image when talking about the way we eat?
Too much focus on body image. I mean,
Yes, next.
well, I was coming to you. That's done.
It's an enormous concern, and certainly, you know, the fact that we have a term called orthorexia, which is where you're, instead of anorexia or bulimia, it is an eating disorder where you are fixated on eating the correct foods. I couldn't agree with you more that when we talk about people who are obese, it really, really worries me that we are labelling people on the basis of what might be a really fundamental distress, fundamental mental distress, and eating disorder. Unfortunately, clean eating is one of my absolute bugbears. I'm delighted that it has finally been largely debunked, and even Deliciously Ella has tried to distance herself from it, not terribly successfully, but on the basis that, interestingly, a very great friend of mine, whom you may know from the media, a chap called Max Pemberton, who's a psychiatrist, he actually works full-time in an NHS eating disorders unit. And he said that about 80% of the young women, in particular, who come in to see him have started off with their eating disorders, with anorexia in particular, as clean eaters. Men, on the other hand, tend to come in from a very, very different direction. And from their perspective, they are much, much more likely to have come in because they became body conscious, because they became focused on the gym, because they moved to orthorexia and then developed an eating disorder as a result of that. The sadness is it's 2 very separate paths, both very, very much focused on how we look. and societal impressions, and they both lead in the same direction, which is eating disorders.
Nathan Atkinson, in your role as a head teacher, I know it was primary level, but you must have seen quite a change over the years. And what issue is it at that level, and from your experience?
I think increasingly it does become prevalent at a younger age, and again, it's all to do with a lot to do with social media and access to images of what is perceived to be the expected, and people trying to fulfill these expectations without the information, without the right knowledge. So I just think there's a lot of peer pressure on people to look a particular way, and when you haven't got the right information, that can be disastrous.
Thank you. Giles Yeo.
So I think undoubtedly on a population, if we look at a population level on average, okay, if you carry too much fat, it's not good for you on a population level, and so clearly we need to lose weight as a population. The question is, how much weight do we need to use, and how much is too much fat? Because I think now what's becoming clear, the data, and it's relatively new data, it's all about your personal fat carrying capacity, right? Where each of us can safely carry a certain amount of fat, because when you get fat, you don't get more fat cells, broadly speaking. You get bigger fat cells. They're like balloons. Okay, so this is how they're like your muscles. They balloon out or they go away. So what happens is, but not everyone's fat cells can get as big as someone else. Okay, and if fat is not being stored in fat, which is where it's safe, it goes somewhere else. Okay, and to your muscles, to your pancreas, to your liver, and that's bad for you. So when you actually look at someone who's metabolically ill, the likelihood is their fat cells have become full, okay, and their fat cells are actually leaking out. But everyone's fat carrying capacity is different. So you can have a skinny type 2 diabetic because they just cannot carry as much fat as someone else, and someone who is absolutely enormous, and you see the newspaper, the fire engine has to cut a hole in the roof in order to get someone out, right? There is no way most people can get to that size without dying because of it. So looking just at weight per se in an individual is unhelpful for actually determining health on an individual basis, even if on a population level it is you can look at it as a risk.
And we're tracking weight right into old age and monitoring that. How does this? What's your take on that?
Of course, we are obsessed with Body Beautiful, and there are all sorts of negative consequences, particularly for vulnerable individuals who take that to heart and act on it accordingly, as we've just heard. I work on older people, and I just say that the sort of obsession with being the right weight goes with those people. They've been overweight for decades, they arrive in their 60s and 70s, they're overweight, and they start to lose weight, and they think, brilliant. And when they've done malnutrition surveys, malnutrition is quite prevalent in older people, amazingly. They've lost weight, they've become thin, but they're actually maybe reasonably pleased about that because they've been fat shamed, if you like. They felt overweight for so long. So actually, we need to think really hard about what is a healthy weight and what should happen to you. And it's not just I was going to say one size fits all, that's unfortunate, but anyway. So of course we shouldn't shame people because of the size or shape that they are. Yeah.
Mark Hanson, do you agree with that? What you've heard?
I was just going to say, it's interesting the cultural differences here, because I don't know if it's still true, Giles, in China that, to be large is to be a sign of success. If you're thin, they think, oh, what's the matter with you? Have you lost your job? You're not earning enough. It's also true in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa where being rather large by our standards is thought to be sexy in a woman. She will be fattened up before marriage. And in other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, because HIV/AIDS tends to make people lose weight, to be rather on the larger side is perhaps a way of saying I'm HIV negative. And interestingly, even just at the language level, we were doing a study in Malaysia where we wanted to interview young people about their lifestyle and so on. And our translators, when we said, well, how would you talk to them about, you're looking rather large, they said, well, there's actually no word for obesity in Boko Malay. The word you translate it best as healthy. Well, you're looking well. So it doesn't have to be like it is in this country, but gosh, it's pretty difficult to shift, isn't it?
Guy Poppy, do you want to come in there?
Well, as you can tell, I'm very body conscious. Worry about my physique and that. But seriously, I think I mean, the points that have been raised, I think, are really important, in which, you know, like everything in life, people like having something to measure. The world I live in, you know, people love key performance indicators, and they don't care whether delivering all of them will give you what you need. So therefore, you know, the issue is that there's an obsession amongst some people with BMI, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, you know, Linford Christie at his peak was obese on a BMI sort of value. I mean, I don't know what his fat cells were doing. So, you know, it's slightly worrying that actually people kind of are driven by these things, which are not necessarily a great indicator of their health. But on the other hand, you know, you can also see people potentially who don't worry about these things because they kind of think, but I'm okay because I can carry it. So, you know, that's a very kind of, you know, unclear answer to you, but I worry about having these targets, and that causes people to kind of worry about I must reach them, etc. But at the same time, you know, you can't have a world in which actually people just take it on themselves and I'm okay though.
Just one thing. I think there's got to be a way of being able to point out that carrying too much fat, being obese, being overweight, I'm not using any of these terms pejoratively, is not healthy for you, without stigmatizing and actually body shaming a person. And I know it's nuanced, but I think we should be able to discuss the problem without blaming the person suffering from the problem. And I think that's and it's difficult. The press can't do it. So we've got to do it better. Yeah.
Josh, where are you? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was very good, thank you.
Does anyone else have an opposing opinion? I see a hand with a black arm lifting up there. White t-shirt.
You're talking about eating disorders and restrictive eating disorders. Why isn't obesity treated the same? Someone can go through the same kind of traumatic event and turn to overeating rather than undereating, but in the media there seems to be a bigger kind of supportive community for people with eating disorders, and there are inpatient, outpatients, there are more treatment orders for it rather than someone with obesity where they may just be kind of shamed and said, you need to lose weight. Why isn't it balanced?
Would you like a quick response on that?
It's an absolutely fantastic question, and actually the simple answer is proportions. So what we have now is we're in a position where 2/3 of the UK population are overweight or obese, over 25% of the population are obese, and well under 1% of the population are underweight. And I absolutely take Shaun's very good point about malnutrition. I think it is something we need to be aware of. By definition, in order to have an eating disorder, you don't just have to be underweight. You can't be diagnosed with anorexia until your body mass index is under 18.5, but you also have to have a whole lot of other things that go along with it. And that would be disordered eating, believing that you are overweight when in fact you aren't, an obsession with eating. So there are all sorts of, it is a mental dis-ease. So very, very few people who are extremely underweight have a mental disorder. Very, very few people are extremely underweight without having a mental disorder such as an eating disorder. The majority of people who are overweight, which is 2/3 of our population, do not have an underlying eating disorder. And the real sadness is that as a result, the people who are overweight as a result of an eating disorder get lumped with them.
Does anyone want a quick comment in the audience? One final one about are we focusing too much on body image? A hand, the lady over here.
Find out which one website or app would each of you state is the best one to give us the advice that we all need to live healthily.
Wow, okay,
You're
in a
all
word.
experts. I respect that.
Patient.info, written by GPs for GPs and their patients.
Anyone else want to come in on that? A one-stop website for
each of you, I'd like
for
to
eating.
From each of you, do you actually agree on that?
I doubt that's
Food.gov.uk.
Yeah.
There we go. Shaun, any particular go-to site?
Public Health England.
There we go.
Yes,
Giles?
Yeah.
There is no one website. I think you gotta There isn't. There just isn't.
Mark, where would you click first?
Oh, there are far too many.
Okay.
There are far too many.
Yeah. I think we have time for one final question to the panel. And Owen Spicer from Barton Peveril. Where are you, Owen?
Yes, so after all this talk about fake food, I'd like to ask the panel, what was the last thing you ate and why?
Sarah.
So I practice, this is not a fad, I practice intermittent fasting because I believe that it is extremely good for my insulin sensitivity. So on average, I eat once a day, but during the course of the day, I eat, usually it's very dull, a piece of fruit and a punnet of cherry tomatoes. So that was the last thing I ate.
Oh, okay, Nathan.
It was a vegan sandwich at Waterloo Station, and I ate it because 50p of it went towards Kitchen Social, which one of my good friends is responsible for the running of, so I thought I was doing a bit of good back there. But I'm not a vegan, but I just went for that one.
Mark Hanson? Just saying.
If we leave aside the lemon drizzle cake, which was very good, if a little too moist to my liking. Actually, I'm sad to say it was one of these. I did a calculation some years ago that if I ate one of these a day, it's got 104 calories in it, and didn't metabolise it, over the course of about 10 to 15 years, I would become the size of Daniel Lambert, who was, from the 18th century, he was, until quite recently, the fattest man ever in the UK. I think he weighed something like 200 kilograms, something like that, 3 or 4 times the size of me anyway. And the funny thing is that actually I've been eating something like this every day since I was your age, and I'm still the same size as I was when I was your age. So what is going on? Why am I unable to become obese from eating this fake food?
Oh,
something in my early life is the answer.
Okay.
So, to be honest, I don't worry nearly enough about what I eat, but I make sure I go and run every day.
Giles Yeo.
This is going to be terrible about what, but actually after my month on this vegan thing, even though I'm a meatitarian, sworn meatitarian, I actually ended up changing my behavior. I thought I was getting older and blah, 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 blah. So my lunchtime is almost every lunchtime is vegan. So I actually had a falafel Buddha bowl. Don't even start. Like it was falafel. It had a hummus. It had edamame beans. It had some kale construction, and it had this purple rice, which I had to chew a lot. That is what I had for my lunch. It just sounds terrible. I'm going to have a burger tonight. I'm just getting...
Just wow. Anyway, Shaun.
So it did occur to me to make something up actually and just have a fictitious lunch, but I'm going to go for it. And what I ate for lunch was cheese and only cheese. And that is because I went to a leaving do yesterday and that's what was left over, and I'm afraid that's what I ate. Yeah.
So cheese, good. And last, by no means least.
Well, I was in a rush today. I was in Liverpool this morning, and so I grabbed something to eat in Birmingham New Street, and I thought I was going to have something like 18 minutes, but my trains being as they are, and crew, meant I only had 3 minutes. So I grabbed a wrap, and inside the wrap was sun-dried tomatoes and hopefully some antibiotic-free chicken.
Well, that's all making me rather hungry now, actually. What about you?
What about you? Yes.
Yeah, well, do you know, I had to taste test the cakes outside, and I'm not going to be... We've all danced around the issue. You almost made an admission to it, but, you know, there you go. Cake with raisin in it. But it doesn't define what I'm going to eat next. Thank you very much to our panel of experts. It's been amazing to have you all here and some great answers to the questions. But actually, thank you to the college students and also other members of the audience for throwing in your opinions and extra questions as well. It's been a delight to have you all here. Thank you very much for coming.